This is an addendum to the Hishtatvus, the participation in the Kinus Torah that we had right after Pesach, on Sunday after Pesach, where I presented the Rebbe's approach based on the Ragat Shover on healing, the different types of healing. Healing, whether refuah is something that affects going forward or also retroactively. And it was based on a letter from the Rebbe, an answer from the Rebbe to someone who was not well, printed in Likutei Sichos, Chelik Tazayin, volume 16, page 515, 516. Because B'nei Ketzer Hazman, due to the shortness of time, I was brief and did not completely discuss everything in detail. And specifically, the real breakdown where the Rebbe cites the Ragat Shover, in that even by refuahs from a Basar Adam, even the healing of human healing, meaning through a doctor, through medicine, there are also different levels of healing, including a healing that also has some retroactive impact. So the Rebbe cited two Ragat Shovers there. One in Hilchis, one in Shal Shechuvas Safras Paneach Siman Samach Zayin, section 67, Ashal and Tshuva, and the other was in Hilchis Mesurei Bia on the Rambam, chapter 16, Halacha Ches. Halacha Ches. Those are the two Ragat Shovers. In truth, when you go look into more detail, there are actually two more Ragat Shovers. And I want to go into more detail because it's specifically the piece where I spoke about that there's a form of healing by human beings that also impacts retroactively. And the Ragat Shover uses the Lashon Nisayin, and the Rebbe uses Arak B'derech Nisayin, and that's what I went and interpreted and explained that, L'chidude, the deeper meaning that it hints to Nisayin as a test, and that the whole illness was only a test, part of our shlichus. But in truth, in the halacha and nigla of it, that was supposed to be an addition to what we're going to speak about now, the nigladic interpretation, what Nisayin means there. So this is the addendum. And see it as a supplement to that Hishtatvus, and hopefully put together, we have the fuller picture. So let's go into the discussion here. Remember, we spoke about that there's Ani Hashem Refecha, Rosh Tevus Avir. God is the healer, and He heals in the way Lo Osem Alecha. We're going to get back to this a little later, but I want to just put it into context. And He heals in a way as if it never happened. But there remains a question: if that can never happen, like it says, Kol HaMachla Shasamti Al Mitzrayim, all the illness I placed in Mitzrayim, Lo Osem Alecha, I will not place on you. So why do we need Ani Hashem Refecha? That God heals. The machal didn't come in the first place. So we'll soon discuss that. But regardless, what the Rebbe says in that letter there, and he brings for the Marsha, that the way God heals is in a way as if it never happened in the first place. And what's taka the answer? The answer is like the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Daf Kuf Hey, says the answer is because the pasuk earlier says, Im shamoya tishmun, if you'll listen to me, you'll never have an illness in the first place. If chaz v'sholem, you don't listen, there may be an illness, but then I'll heal you in a way as if it never happened. That is possible above. That's possible above. There's also a possibility, tshuva miyira, where it only affects a healing, a tshuva that only affects going forward. That's min hashamayim. What about the healing of human beings? That's the question now. Seeming a human being doesn't have that power of the divine, the power of healing retroactively. And yet, the Rebbe brings, based on the Ragat Shover, based on different Gemaras, that we have also a taste of that, or a similarity to that, even in the healing of human beings, that it could also be retroactive. So the Rebbe brings the two Ragat Shovers, and I'm going to cite the other ones as well. Why the Rebbe brings those two? Because it makes the point. It doesn't have to go through every Ragat Shover. But for the full picture, it's good for context. So let's begin with the first one that Rebbe cites. The first Ragat Shover is the Shalosh Tshuvas. And it addresses, briefly, the Mishnah in Yevomis, Daf Ayin Tes Omid Beis. There's a Mishnah, there's a machlekes there between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Elazar. What's the machlekes? It's talking about a sodis, a person who is infertile. Now there's a sodis chama, which is Rashi interprets someone who's born infertile, and there's one that it comes, sodis adam, which means it comes later through an accident that causes the person to become infertile. So the shaila is, a person like that, is he in the gedder of chalitza? If his brother passes away and had a wife, there were no children, so there's a mitzvah of yibum. Unless he does chalitza, but a person who can't have a child, the whole purpose of it is because the brother is going to replace his brother, that the seed, there should be fruit from the seed if he's unable to have children. So the question is whether he's even in that gedder, is he even in that category? So there's a distinction between someone born that way or someone that becomes by accident. And the machlekes is like this. Rabbi Akiva says, if born that way, no. He's born that way. So he's not in the gedder of being a yavam, a yibum, and chalitza. Rabbi Elazar says no. Rabbi Elazar says, because he's born that way, he's still shaykh refuah. He could be healed. And if he could be healed, then he's able to have children. If it happens as an accident, then there's nothing you can do. It caused permanent damage. So the Ragat Shover touches upon this and addresses it. I'm not going to go through all the details. The Ragat Shover in his classic style brings all the different sources. But the bottom line is, what does he derive from this? What is Rabbi Elazar saying? Why is that? Why is there's a possible refuah? If there's refuah, so if you're talking about that he's healed when his brother passed away, then for sure there's chalitza. If, however, he could be healed late, he's still in that category because he could be healed, means that he was never really necessarily infertile. It could just be it wasn't developed. And this is where the Rebbe cites the Ragat Shover's language. What's the Ragat Shover? So he says like this: have a sodas chama. Valkein de zeloi have a sodas chama. Av sheneled kach rak mishi yeshle simone sodas. So he says this is vatam damrina sheisrapa v'loi begeder of four mekan lahaba. Rak hametzias came. V'adayin loy nigmar hadover. What Rabbi Elazar is saying, that he's in the category, not in the regular category of regular healing. Healing is only from here on. It's not retroactive. But Rabbi Elazar is saying this is not really a gedder of four. This is revealing what was there in the first place. That he was never really infertile. He wasn't an infertile person. So if you're talking about a healing, that's only going forward. But here it was just a person, that was his mitzias. And it wasn't yet developed, it was lay nigmar. That's what the Rebbe quotes. So what do we see from this? That this is a situation where it's a human healing, but it's a healing that just reveals what he was in the first place. Something, intervention, that reveals that he wasn't truly infertile. This becomes clear in the second Ragat Shover that the Rebbe cites. What's the second Ragat Shover? The second Ragat Shover is Hilchus Isuri Bia, Perik Tazayin Aloche Ches. So there the discussion is about a mum, the idea of a wound, an injury. So the Ragat Shover brings a teisvus and b'cheres. I believe he also brings it in the first Ragat Shover. Let me just check. I'm almost sure he does, but maybe not. No, I don't think so. Okay. I thought he does. I thought maybe he does. Doesn't matter. Let's go back to Hilchas Esuri Bia. Here he brings a taste for some b'cheres. B'cheres daf lamet ches omid beis. What's the discussion there? Let's put that into context. The context there is talking about a b'cher. B'cher behema. If the firstborn of an animal is not allowed to be used for chulin, it has gedusha to it. It can only be used for hegdish, for holy things. However, what happens if it has a mum? So a mum, it passes is no longer hegdish, no longer kedish, it's chayil. The question that the Gemara in B'cheres addresses at length, what is a mum? Is it a permanent injury? Is it a temporary one? Is it one that is born with? Is it one that comes later? So in this particular section is talking about a mum, about a wound, an injury to the eye. So discussion there whether the white part of the eye is protruding or the injury or the mum is the wound is in the black part of the eye. And there's a whole distinction between both of them. It's not relevant to go into the details here. But he brings there that there's a wound, he calls it barka, he calls it a wound, and Tosfos says there that this wound is mashma from the Gemara, it's a mum kavua, means a permanent wound. And therefore the animal's puzzle, and therefore you could use it, you could shecht it, you could do anything you want with it, a piteir. Because it's no longer a b'cheir, it's a mum, the wound. Tosfos then asks a question. Mum kavuas, but we find in other places that this mum, what's called barka, is a mum that can be healed. Since it could be healed, how could you call it a permanent wound? And Tosfos says mechadish. Tosfos says something a chidush, that a wound that does not heal itself, it always remains a wound. If it requires intervention, medical intervention, not a true wound. That's where he uses the lashon. Tosfos uses the lashon that it's only rak dovish adein. He says dovish adein nesoyin. They lo have a mum. It begeded nesoyin. Like Tosfos says there, the lashon Tosfos says is nesoyin ubirur ubedika. In other words, there's a real wound. You come to a doctor, and the doctor looks at it and has to do some healing. But there's sometimes you have symptoms. So the symptoms are there, but then when it's diagnosed, diagnostics are done, testing, nesoyin ubedika, and you discover, no, it wasn't really there. So the Raga Shava says the lashon, it's only nesoyin. Have a ged in nesoyin. So he says the yesterday before, and here he brings like the Gemara Yevamos Daf Ayin Tes, Gabesaris Tama, that chama, that what? That this is only a nesoyin. It only revealed that it wasn't a wound in the first place. And that's what the Rebbe brings. That we see even in the four of Basar V'Dam, there's a situation where it's not a real healing. The doctors do intervention. There was something there. There were symptoms. So you can't say there was nothing there. But the impact of refuah makes it retroactive. You prove that it never had an issue in the first place, but you needed the medical intervention to find out. But it's not an intervention. It's not a refuah gemura, as Tosfos says, that completely heals. That's why you could say there's healing. It still remains a mum, because rather a mum kavua is one that if you need intervention, it means it still remains an injury. But what Tosfos adds is that if it's the cases where you see that it's not a mum, it's only because of bedika. So the refuah is not a real refuah. The refuah was just revealing what was there in the first place. And that's what the Rebbe gives the example. So we have an example. Just for the record, Tosfos disagrees with Rashi, because Rashi becomes clear from Rashi a little later in that daf in the Gemara in Becheres that Rashi feels that even if you can bring healing, if you can heal a wound, it's a true healing, and the becher remains kaddish. It's not a bal mum, as opposed to Tosfos that if you need intervention of healing, that means it still remains a wound. No, then it's like, I don't want to say cosmetic, but it's really only a refuah from here on. Whereas a medical intervention that's revealing a test that reveals that something wasn't really an issue in the first place is a different story. Then it's not a bal mum. Okay. That's the second place. And the Raga Shava actually compares it to Haid Yevamos, what we spoke earlier, the Dasa Rabbi Lozer, by the Sodas Chama. That what? That it's a healing in that type of way that it reveals that in the first place it wasn't really an issue. But to say that it's completely the mafreya, like in the case of Ani Hashem Nefecha, as we'll soon discuss, you can't say that either. But you see now, in human healing, there's two types. A real issue that's healed, and diagnostics and testing and the bdika and so on, that reveals that the refuah reveals that it was a non-issue in the first place. Okay. Now there's another. We'll go to the Ragachover on Hilchos Ishus. In Hilchos Ishus, there's a discussion. The halacha is discussion from the Gemara. I'm a kaddish isha, someone who marries a woman, but al mnas on a tanai, at a condition that she has no illness, that she has no mumim, she has no blemishes, no defects, no handicaps, and then you find out she does. So simply put, the kedushin was on a tanai, on a condition. The condition wasn't fulfilled, so it should be retroactive, not a kedushin. But it's not that black and white, because it comes down to finding out what kind of illness or what kind of blemish was there. So the Ragachover again, in Hilchos Ishus, I mentioned chapter 7, Halacha Tes, Perek Zayin Halacha Tes. So what does he bring there? He says, Avli im hoye bo mumim, ke'ein ma shekosav ha-tesus b'cheres, daf lamet ches amid beis, the same tesus we just discussed. Sharafu hi rak levarer, mikudeshas. If she has symptoms, so you could say if she has symptoms, then the kedushin is not a kedushin. But if it's a refuah, that's only lak levarer, only to clarify, then it's just a matter of proving something. It's not. I want to just add one more thing from the Teisvus and Bcheres. The Gemara there is talking about another type of mum, which is watery eyes of the animal. So the question is, there are ways when you give the animal to eat from the hay, from the food, fodder, that is moist and dry. So the Gemara talks about a whole thing, how it could actually heal it. The question is it a healing element or is it a diagnostic? And that's the machlekes between Teisvus and Rashi. Rashi says it's a healing. And Teisvus says it's only proving something, it's only a test to see whether the watery eyes are really a problem or they're just a symptom that really, and we reveal it's not a real mum. So he brings that from Bcheres, Sherefui rak levarer, then Mekudeshes. Why? Because there wasn't a real mum. His condition was that the woman has a real problem. There's no real problem, only a symptom. And Refu reveals it's only levarer. In Teisvus and Bcheres, he uses the word b'dika, the soin and b'dika. Here he uses the word levarer. So that's the third Ragachover, based on the Hilchos Ishus. Fine. Then there's one more Ragachover, in Hilchos Tshuva. In Hilchos Tshuva, so it talks about different types of tshuva. We know the Gemara says, and here we go into the whole discussion. The Rebbe also refers to it in the letter in Chelik Tazayin, and volume 16. Here it talks about different types of tshuva miyira, which affects when a person does tshuva out of fear. It wipes away the sin only going forward, not retroactive. Tshuva ma'ava has the power to retroactively change. How about refuah? Refuah is compared to tshuva. Tshuva may be refuah le'elam. So in refuah too, there are different levels. The Ragachover connects the tshuva to the refuah. This is in Hilchos Tshuva, Perek Beis, Halacha Tes. I'm sorry, did I say Halacha Tes? Halacha Beis. Perek Tes, Perek Beis, Halacha Beis. I apologize. Okay. So the Rebbe in his letter says, let's go back to the letter, he says, that what it says in Gemara. In the Gemara, we're talking now in Yuma, Pevov, and in Ksubis, Ayin Daled, I believe. So there the Gemara says, both places, that there's a difference between Hataras Nedarim. The Gemara says, let me see the exact Gemara, let me make sure I have the right Gemara. Yeah, Ksubis Ayin Daled, and it's also in Yuma talks about the tshuva and the. So what does he say in Gemara Ksubis Ayin Daled Amid Beis Aloshin? There is in Hataras Nedarim of a chacham. Person takes upon themselves a vow. But you can absolve a vow. And you can absolve a vow, a chochem has the power to be ekres haneder mi'ikara. Meaning not just absolving it from the time when he's absolving it, he absolves it like the neder never happened in the first place. So the Gemara says that's by a aforas haneder. Refuas mum ayderef ein meraf be'ela mekan lahaba. The healing of a doctor is only going forward. That's the Gemara in Ksubis, and similar in Yuma, which talks about tshuva. So the Ragachover says like this: that in truth is there are really three types. So first, I'll start with the end of the Ragachover. He says, "Yesh beis minei refuos, echad mekana lahaba, kamoy hachdik subes daf ayin dalar amid beis." This one we just said from going forward. The echad lemafreya. In refuah, there's also a form of lemafreya, and that's like the taste for simcheres lamed ches amid beis. So here we have in the clear indication two types of refuah. So the Gemara in Ksubis and the Gemara in Yuma, where it says that it's going forward, and Rashi says that still remains the name. There was still like a person that was ill that became healed. You cannot say that he was never ill. So Rashi's Lashon Miktsah Shmoy Olav. The Rebbe brings that in the letter, as I cited then in the original Miktsah Shmoy Olav. Peivav Aleph, right? That's a refuah from going forward, but there's a refuah that's retroactive, like the taste of simcheres. And here the Ragachover brings it in context of Hilchos Tshuva. Now, to be more complete, let's read the Ragachover in more detail. He says a few lines before that, he says there's actually three types of tshuva. One is a tshuva, he says, that comes ma'ava. Kamoy chochem eiker. Remember, ava is retroactive. Tshuva. Retroactive. Says Deinas Naslei Kazachis. You actually transform the past. It's retroactive. Not just retroactive, you could actually turn the sins into zachis, into merits. Habeiz miyira. Miyira, here he says, interestingly, miyira is from awe, from fear. Kamoy hachden adorim daf ayin hey. I'm sorry. Kamoy makeh refuah. That's like a makeh refuah, which is what? It's like a makeh refuah, but it's the higher level of refuah, a retroactive effect. But it's not completely like a chochem eiker, because a chochem eiker is completely retroactive, as if it never happened. Here he says, it's like a makeh refuah, something happened. Like we said in the Tosfos, the symptoms were there. You needed to go to a doctor, you needed medical intervention, but the intervention was not a healing sort. Going forward, it's proved that the illness wasn't there in the first place. So it still has some remnant, some trace of illness because there were symptoms. There was the challenges and all that they brought. And he brings achar refuah kedem hamaka. In this second level of tshuva miyira, the refuah precedes the makkah. And he gives an example. Chayol neb'teil k'may hachden nedarim daf ayin hey. What means chayol neb'teil? There it talks about a woman who takes upon herself a vow. Talking about in the Gemara there in Nedarim Ayin Hey, 75. So now we know a husband is able to absolve the vow of his wife. So the question there's two opinions. When he absolves her vow, is it as if she never took a vow? Or as if the vow was taken, but it was immediate and it applied, but it was immediately absolved? And there's all kinds of nafkaminas in halacha. One difference would be if someone else took a vow on the condition that her vow stands. So if the vow never happened in the first place, his vow is meaningless. If there was a vow that was there, it was immediately absolved, his vow has some standing. Bottom line is that there's chayolin, meaning it's chal, v'b'telin. So what do you see from that? That it's not completely like a chochem. A chochem, eker neder mikare, it's completely retroactive, as if it never happened. Here you have a situation where there's a makkah, but the refuah is kedem makkah. His absolving immediately stops it. So the Ragachover compares that to the higher level of healing that's only abdikas, that's only mavarer, only clarifies. That's what the Ragachover says. And then there's a third level of tshuva, Yisurin, al yithru, affliction. And that one is have a mekana lahaba. That's like mekana lahaba, meaning like a refuah that's only from here going forward. So that covers the picture, and the Rebbe is bringing in that letter the chiddush is that he's saying not only God heals in a way that's retroactive, even in human healing there's elements of that, but it's not that level because we cannot completely make it retroactive. So to conclude, we come away with this, you can say there's 6 levels of healing. The first and highest level is when you follow what God says, then we have the promise le'osim alecha. Nothing will happen at all. Period. It's over with. Doesn't happen. It's preventive medicine from above. A second level is God's healing, but it's coming after there was an illness, and the healing is Ani Hashem Reifecha, in a way, like the Marsha explains in the Gemara in Yuma, Pei Beis, is it Pei? Yeah, Gemara in Yuma Pei Beis. Just want to make sure. I'm sorry, Pei Vav. Daf Pei Vav, not Pei Beis. Daf Pei Vav, that there was no Reishim at all, but it's God's healing. That's two levels from the divine form of healing. In human healing, there's a bunch of levels. I can enumerate here at least 3 or 4. Let's see. First one is the language of the Rambam. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Deis, which we didn't address, and the Rebbe does not bring that in the letter in Chelik Tazayin, which is interesting, because there's already an illness. But just for the full picture, there is a Rambam. The Rambam is in Hilchos Deis, Perek Daled, Halacha Chof. Yeah. Chapter 4, Halacha 20. Rambam says that if a person will be careful in the instructions he gives how to eat and how to drink and how to sleep and that, so on, right? I guarantee, I serve as a guarantor that I'll never come to an illness all his days. A type of preventive medicine from the human level. So that's one. Then comes when there is already an illness. So the next step would be a refuah that's only lavarer, the soyin. It's only a test, meaning doctor's tests. And that reveals it's not really a refuah that Agad Shavra calls it. It's not a true refuah. Like Tosfos says in Bcheres. It's only a diagnostic that reveals that the test showed that there wasn't a real illness. So we have already now 4 levels. 2 from Hashem and 2 by human beings. The next one would be refuah mamish. Refuah gemura, the language of Tosfos. Mekana lahaba. That's not retroactive. It's not revealing anything from the past. It's going forward. It's healing, complete healing. And then, of course, he doesn't bring it because it's a different category. It would be a refuah that doesn't completely heal Rahman al-Islah. But we don't want to even go there. In the full picture of things, however, these are the levels of healing. And what we have here is that even among humans, we also have an element of retroactive effect, as we just enumerated and elaborated. Let me conclude with a bracha, that just by learning Hilchos Refuah and Hilchos Tshuva, Kol ha'esek b'teiros elo, when you learn something, it's as if you did it. So may the learning and the exploration and the analysis of refuah on all these levels actually bring a refuah that's completely, not just from human retroactive, but completely from Hashem, Ani Hashem Reifecha, in this month of Iyar, as if it lay osim alecha, as if it never happened. V'ruach hatuma avim min ha'oretz, that God will remove all the toxins, the spirit, the toxic spirit from this earth, all toxins, all impurities, all diseases, all pandemics, epidemics. All the people in this world should have a complete refuah shlema and kreva in a way that as if it never happened, and God should protect the rest of us that it shouldn't happen in the first place. We should already be zeicher to the gula amitis v'ashlema, total refuah in the best possible way, not just a healing of an illness, but refuah in the sense that you're complete and wholesome from here on, only health and long life, and life forever actually, because when there's no more illness and there's no more chet in this world, there's no more iniquities, you have chayim nitzchim.